So to discuss how this will impact the comedy circuit, I'm joined by the editor of the British Comedy Guide, Aaron Brown. Thank you for being here. So, Aaron, are you a fan of Mock the Week? Have you enjoyed this show for many years?
I have been watching it since the start, yes. I think it had perhaps had a bit of a slightly lower patch in the early 2010s, but
Yes.
had really got a lot stronger in the last few years again, with some a really strong kind of rotation of guests who felt a lot more comfortable together and comfortable with the format, and it was slightly less adversary than it had perhaps been.
Well, it had that reputation, didn't it? Yeah. Particularly in the early days. And something that it strikes me that the show has evolved in a really interesting way, because early on you had Frankie Boyle, people like that saying very, very edgy things. And there was an old joke about it's called Mock the Week because they mock the week. And and then that sort of shifted. Something happened probably around 8-7 years ago, didn't it?
Yeah. So I think, as with so much in not just comedy, but in our wider culture of the past few years, it really all started to change around Brexit.
Right.
I don't think there was anything planned, anything. It was just kind of a natural evolution because of the way politics and cultural and topical discussions were dividing along those kind of lines.
But they weren't dividing within the comedy industry, and I think that was part of the problem. I mean, Marcus Brigstock spoke about how when he's touring his show, and he was obviously slagging off Brexit voters, as most comics were doing, and people were walking out because not everyone lives in London in middle-class houses. Yeah,
I mean, this is the kind of the paradox of Brexit in comedy is that comedy is traditionally, or at least stand-up comedy, is traditionally somewhat radical, somewhat anti-establishment, and yet here comedians found themselves almost entirely on the side of the establishment, on the side of the status quo.
Yes.
And, you know, the side against change. And that is completely alien from almost anything else since the modern wave of comedy started in kind of the early 80s.
And yet the way that comics who do try to take an anti-establishment position, they're often demonised by people within the industry. This is happening more and more. So, you know, if you take the Brexit example, there were just a few of us who were pro-Brexit comedians, and we were told we were far-right, evil, all this nonsense. So, but that was coming and very much being policed within the industry.
Yeah, I mean, it's difficult to know kind of exactly what the driving force behind that was. I suspect that there wasn't like a particular organisation that they all sort of said, well, let's push this agenda, not that one.
Yeah,
I think it was quite an organic decision that everybody kind of arrived at the same time because they were of that viewpoint.
Well, I mean, it was just a kind of level of conformity. I had comics say to me in private, I sort of agree with what you're saying, but I'd never say it publicly. There was just a kind of general sense that there's one opinion you're allowed to have on this issue. You know, that was it.
And it's kind of
boring for comedy.
Yes, it's boring for comedy. It's it is a valid viewpoint to have. I don't agree with it personally. I'm sure most of the viewers of the show tonight don't agree with it, but it is a valid view to have. It is valid that some comedians have that view and be putting it forward in their shows.
Yes.
But to have every comedian putting the same view forward, often in largely the same terms, really didn't do comedy necessarily the good that such a divisive and important issue could have done. There were no arguments being made. There was no interesting discussions. It was all very much...
Yeah, but it's also like, some of the people... The EU was ripe for mockery. All of these centre-right, political figures, Verhofstadt, the people who were behind a lot of this in the European Commission, they were figures of fun. Yeah. Donald Tusk. I mean, these are people that you should be mocking, but no one wanted to do it. Do you think that this kind of homogeneity within the comedy industry, when it comes to politics, accounts for or has contributed towards the inevitable demise of Mock the Week?
I think it hasn't helped. I think Mock the Week has been harmed by other factors within comedy and within television more generally.
Yeah.
As it kind of pursues, television is essentially at the moment pursuing a self-fulfilling agenda of subserviency to the streaming platforms.
Yes.
They see lower audiences, so the commissioning decisions change and the scheduling decisions change, and then the audiences aren't coming for the shows that are already on, and so those ratings drop further and further, and everything kind of goes on a downward spiral.
Do you think then that comedy commissioners need to be less risk averse when it comes to comedy?
Yeah, I think this is true across genres, actually, and not just comedy. Of course, in comedy it is probably most acute at the moment. But, yeah, definitely there needs to be more diversity of style of programme, of, thought and opinions and sort of lifestyles and culture within programmes. If we think about the kind of sitcoms that are around today, there is very little that you could call a kind of working class culture, either representing or particularly appealing to in its humour.
Yes.
There's very little that's broad, that would attract multi-million viewers. Today we talk about comedy greats as being shows like The Likely Lads or Porridge, Blackadder, Fawlty Towers, Dad's Army. Do you think there's anything around at the moment that people will be talking about in the same kind of terms in another 40 years?
I'd say no.
No. Now, I think that there is nothing around at the moment that doesn't deserve to exist on its own merits, but it is all so very tonally similar, all coming from a place of the same it's a very middle class kind of intelligentsia, to use that elite kind of terminology. It's that kind of outlook, and it doesn't really appeal beyond the big metropolitan centres.
Absolutely. Well, maybe things will change now when these older shows are falling away.
We can but hope.
Well, thank you very much for joining me today, Aaron. Really appreciate it.